Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now before I begin, tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. It was one of those mild spring afternoons when the sun felt gentle and forgiving. The park near my house had just started to bloom again, tulips pushing through the earth, and children running around with that early season excitement. My nephew Daniel had come to visit for the weekend. He was 17 then, tall and a little awkward in that in-between stage of boyhood and manhood. We hadn't spent time alone in a while, so when he asked if I wanted to go for a walk, I didn't hesitate. I remember the way he shuffled beside me, kicking small stones on the path. He wasn't a talkative boy, not usually, but that day I sensed something quiet sitting heavy on him. We walked under the big oak trees that arched over the path like old guardians. Their branches whispered when the wind passed through, and for a moment I thought maybe silence was what we both needed. But then he spoke, his voice lower than usual. "Aunt Clara," he said, "do you ever feel like you're supposed to be someone else?" I stopped mid-step. The question caught me completely off guard. I turned to look at him. His face was serious, eyes fixed on the ground. I could see the struggle behind his words, like he'd been holding on to them for months. I didn't answer right away. I just waited. Sometimes silence invites the truth more than words do. He kept walking, and I followed. "At school," he went on, "everyone expects you to be something. Funny, smart, good at sports, whatever. But I don't think I fit any of that. I feel like people only see what they want, not who I really am." Something in me softened instantly. Maybe because I'd felt that way too many years ago, but no one had asked me if I was okay. I could hear the ache in his tone, that familiar longing to be understood. I told him softly, "Daniel, I've felt that way more times than I can count. And it doesn't stop just because you grow older. Sometimes even adults wear masks just to be accepted." He looked up at me then, his expression surprised. "You too?" he asked. I nodded, especially me. I told him about the years when I stayed quiet at family gatherings, pretending everything was fine while my marriage was falling apart. About how I smiled through things I didn't believe in, just to keep peace. The path ahead curved toward the pond, where ducks glided over the water like small boats. Daniel listened intently, his face open, thoughtful. After a moment, he said, "So, pretending doesn't mean lying?" That question lingered in the air longer than I expected. "No," I said finally. "Pretending can be surviving. But the goal is to stop pretending when you finally find people who see you for who you are." He nodded slowly, processing every word. For the first time, I noticed how much he resembled my brother. Same jawline, same thoughtful pause before speaking. It made me ache a little, realizing how quickly time was slipping by. The boy who used to run around my kitchen with chocolate-covered hands was now asking life-sized questions. As we neared the bench overlooking the pond, Daniel sat down and stared at the rippling water. "Sometimes," he said, "I think Mom and Dad don't really know me either. They're busy, I get it, but it feels like I'm invisible." That word, invisible, hit me harder than I expected. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not invisible, sweetheart. You're just quieter than the world expects, and that's okay. The world gets noisy, but people like you, people who think deeply, bring balance." He turned to me and smiled faintly. It was small but genuine. I could tell he was hearing those words not as comfort, but as something he'd been waiting to believe. We sat there for a while, not talking much. The air carried the faint scent of lilacs, and the sun had started to dip low, painting everything in gold. I thought about how rare these moments were, the kind that don't announce their importance but stay in your heart anyway. As we started heading back, Daniel said something I'll never forget. "I think I understand now. Maybe it's not about trying to be seen by everyone, just by the right people. That sentence stayed with me. It was so simple, yet it felt like something profound had shifted, not just in him, but in me too. Maybe we all spend too much of life chasing the wrong eyes to notice the right ones already see us. When we reached the gate of the park, Daniel gave me a quick hug, the kind that said more than words ever could. I didn't know then that this walk would become one of the memories I'd revisit often, the kind that reminds you that sometimes wisdom doesn't flow from age to youth, but from youth to those of us still learning how to listen. That evening, as the last light faded from the sky, I realized something I hadn't in years. The simplest conversations often reveal the deepest truths. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping softly against the window. It was the kind of gentle drizzle that made everything outside look like a watercolor painting. Faded, calm, and slightly nostalgic. I made tea and sat by the kitchen table, still thinking about what Daniel had said the day before. Maybe it's not about trying to be seen by everyone, just by the right people. The words kept echoing in my mind. There was something profoundly grown up about them, something that made me proud, but also strangely sad. He came downstairs a little later, hair messy, wearing one of those hoodies that swallowed him whole. I noticed his eyes looked clearer, lighter even. "Morning," he mumbled, sitting down across from me. I poured him some tea, and for a while, we just listened to the rain. "You know," I said after a moment, "what you said yesterday, about being seen, it really stayed with me." He smiled shyly. "I didn't mean to sound all philosophical. It just came out." I laughed softly. "That's usually when the truest things come out, Daniel, when we're not trying to sound wise." He stirred his tea, watching the tiny ripples form on the surface. I don't know if I was right, though. Maybe I just said it to make myself feel better. I leaned back in my chair. Feeling better is the first step toward being right. Sometimes the truth isn't something we prove, it's something we grow into. He looked at me for a long second before nodding. I could tell he was thinking deeply again, his mind somewhere between understanding and doubt. Later that afternoon, when the rain cleared, he asked if we could go back to the park. "I kind of want to see it again," he said. I grabbed my umbrella just in case, and off we went. The park looked completely different under the gray sky, quieter, gentler. Puddles mirrored the trees above, and the air smelled like wet earth and leaves. As we walked, Daniel told me about a girl from his class. Nothing romantic, just someone who made him feel understood. "She's different," he said. "She listens. Not like she's waiting for her turn to talk, but like she actually wants to know." I smiled, though inside I felt something tender stir. It reminded me of myself at his age, that feeling of finding someone who seemed to see you when no one else did. "She sounds like a good person," I said. He shrugged, trying to play it cool, but I caught the small grin tugging at his lips. "Yeah, she is. But it's weird, Aunt Clara. I don't know how to talk to her sometimes. I feel like I'll say something wrong, and she'll realize I'm not that interesting." I laughed gently. "Oh, Daniel, that's how everyone feels when they care." He kicked a pebble, looking embarrassed. "You think so?" "I know so. The people who care about how they come across usually have the kindest hearts. The loudest ones rarely think that way." He smiled at that, his shoulders relaxing. For a few moments we walked in silence again, just the sound of our shoes brushing the damp gravel. Then he said quietly, "You know, I think I understand you better now, too." That made me pause. "What do you mean?" "When I was younger, you always seemed, I don't know, distant, like your mind was somewhere else. But now I think maybe you were just trying to hold everything together." His words struck me like a soft wind, gentle but undeniable. I hadn't realized he'd noticed those years of quiet sadness, the times when I smiled through heartbreak, through loneliness. I felt something tighten in my throat. "You're right," I admitted. I was holding on, but maybe not in the right way. He looked at me thoughtfully. Maybe you just needed someone to ask if you were okay. Kind of like me yesterday. That moment, that single sentence, melted something I didn't even know I'd been carrying for so long. It was strange, comforting and painful all at once, to realize that the boy I'd once carried on my shoulders was now old enough to see through my silences. We reached the same bench as before, the one overlooking the pond, and sat down. The rain had left the grass glistening, and 2 ducks were preening themselves by the water's edge. Daniel leaned back and sighed. I think people forget adults still need to be asked how they're doing, he said. He was right again. I looked at him, this boy who was slowly becoming a man, and felt an immense sense of gratitude. You've got a good heart, Daniel, the kind that doesn't just see people. It understands them. He smiled softly, his eyes reflecting the silver light of the sky. I think I get that from you. The air was cool, but I felt warmth spread through me. That simple sentence felt like a gift, unplanned, honest, and deeply human. When we finally headed home, I noticed how easy the silence felt between us. Not the kind that hides discomfort, but the kind that says everything important has already been said. And as I looked at him walking beside me, hands in his pockets, I realized that maybe this was how healing worked, not in sudden moments of clarity, but in small walks, soft words, and shared quiet that lasts long after the rain. That night, after Daniel had gone to bed, I sat by the window with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the reflections of the streetlights shimmer on the wet pavement. My mind kept replaying our conversations from the past 2 days, the honesty, the simplicity, the unexpected depth that had unfolded between us. I realized how rare it was to have such moments, especially with someone younger. It reminded me that understanding doesn't always come from years lived, but from how deeply one listens. The next morning, Daniel surprised me by waking up early. The air smelled fresh from the rain, and the world felt reset, like the first page of a clean notebook. He appeared at the doorway, jacket half-zipped, holding 2 coffees from the corner cafe. Figured I'd get us something before you started your day, he said, a little shyly. I smiled. You're learning the art of thoughtful gestures. He shrugged, setting the cups down on the table. I guess I just like how it feels when someone remembers the little things. We decided to take another walk, this time not to the park, but along the river trail that curved around the old part of town. The path was lined with trees, still dripping from yesterday's rain, and the sound of running water filled the quiet spaces between our steps. Birds were beginning to return for spring, their calls echoing softly across the water. As we walked, Daniel started talking about his plans for college. He wasn't sure what he wanted to study, only that he wanted to do something that actually meant something. He said it with such conviction that I couldn't help but feel both admiration and worry. I knew the world didn't always reward sincerity. What does meaning something mean to you? I asked. He looked up, squinting against the sunlight peeking through the trees. I don't know exactly. I just don't want to live on autopilot, you know. I see people, grown-ups, just existing. Working, eating, sleeping, repeating. I don't want that. His words made me stop walking. It was strange hearing him describe so perfectly what I had once feared for myself. I used to tell my husband, before we divorced, that life felt like watching a movie on mute, everything moving but nothing alive inside. You're right, I said finally. Autopilot living is easy, but it slowly empties you. He turned to me. So how do you stop that? I smiled sadly. You don't always. Sometimes you drift for years before you notice. But if you're asking that question now, Daniel, you're already ahead of most people. He kicked at the edge of the path, thoughtful. Do you ever wish you could start over? That question hung between us like mist over the river. I took a deep breath. I used to wish that all the time, I admitted. But lately, I think we don't really need to start over. We just need to start again right where we are. He looked at me, curious. What's the difference? Starting over means erasing what came before, I said. Starting again means carrying what you've learned and still choosing to move forward. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he nodded slowly. That makes sense. We stopped by a small wooden bridge overlooking the water. The current was calm that day, carrying bits of leaves and twigs downstream. Daniel leaned on the railing, staring into the flow. I think that's what scares me about growing up, he said quietly. Making mistakes I can't undo. His honesty hit me harder than I expected. Maybe because I'd spent half my life trying to undo things that couldn't be undone. You'll make mistakes, I told him gently. But if you let them teach you instead of haunt you, they'll become part of your strength. He glanced at me with a faint, grateful smile. Did you ever make one that changed everything? I hesitated. Yes, I stayed silent when I should have spoken. I thought keeping peace was more important than keeping myself. He absorbed that without judgment, just quiet understanding. I think I do that too, he said after a pause. Not speaking when I should, but it's hard to know the right time. Maybe there isn't a right time, I said. Just the time you finally decide you're ready. The sun broke through the clouds then, scattering light across the river like thousands of tiny mirrors. For a while we didn't talk. The quiet between us wasn't empty. It was filled with understanding, unspoken but complete. As we turned back toward home, Daniel suddenly said, Aunt Clara, can I tell you something without you laughing? Of course, I said. He hesitated, then blurted, Sometimes I think I understand you more than I understand my parents. You listen differently. His voice cracked just slightly, and I felt my heart tighten. Maybe that's because we both learned how to listen after being unheard for too long, I said softly. He didn't answer, but he reached out and gently squeezed my hand as we walked. That small gesture spoke more than any words could. By the time we reached the corner near my house, I realized something that would stay with me for years. Life's most profound connections often appear in the simplest moments: shared silence, a walk by the river, or a sentence spoken from a young man still learning who he is. And as I looked at Daniel beside me, I understood that both of us had changed, quietly and forever, in ways neither of us had planned.